Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday. On November 3rd, 2020, a little-known politician named Zohran Mamdani was elected to represent New York's 36th congressional district in the state assembly. Mamdani came out of nowhere. At the time, he wasn't even 30 years old. Yet little did America's greatest city, our crown jewel of achievement on the world stage, know just how meteoritic his rise would eventually become. Mamdani, as many know by now, was born in Uganda. His mother was a filmmaker and his father was a prestigious professor specializing in something called quote-unquote post-colonial studies. In other words, they were radicals, and Mamdani was incubated as such. After a brief stop in South Africa, admittedly an odd place for a quote-unquote post-colonialist to choose to live, by the way, the Mamdanis moved to New York when Zohran was 7, settling in, go figure, the Upper West Side. To Mamdani the Younger's credit, he acknowledged this leg up immediately. Quote, "I never had to want for something, and yet I knew that that was not in any way the reality for most New Yorkers." End quote. Mamdani was also raised a devout Muslim and advocated from a very age for anti-war and pro-Islamist causes around the world. In 2014, for example, he founded the school's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine while graduating with a degree in Africana Studies. He soon found work after graduating from Bowdoin College, a prestigious liberal arts college in Maine, as a foreclosure prevention and housing counselor that assisted low-income families in New York City avoid getting evicted. It was here where the seeds for the incredible rise of Zohran Mamdani were planted, as all Marxists and communists do, and Mamdani certainly is both of those. They use their positions of privilege and prestige to appeal to the underclass of a society. That's how they get their power, by quote-unquote renouncing their own advanced positioning to quote-unquote advocate for those who are trampled on by the rest of the ruling elite. It was the entitled, the privileged, the wealthy that led the revolutions in France, the Soviet Union, China, and all the rest. In his role, Mamdani primarily worked in Queens to help people who were served with eviction notices fight back and stay in their residences. If anyone has been in this situation before, it's absolutely awful. A home, particularly one with a family inside, symbolizes something much more than shelter. It is the place where your children grow up, where birthdays are celebrated, where people can find rest after a long day of work. That level of stability being threatened by the government, whether justly or unjustly, is a very disorienting and humiliating thing to endure. It throws everything you know into chaos. Zohran Mamdani noticed this right off the bat, and with his entire life seemingly pointed in this direction, began to craft a coherent message out of his experiences dealing with the New York City affordability crisis. In 2015, Mamdani began work on local political campaigns and officially joined the Democratic Socialists of America, where he began to learn from the failures and successes of the most radical politicians in one of the most radical cities in America. In addition, Mamdani, like fellow radical Beto O'Rourke, started a music career. But unlike O'Rourke, who is idiotic and stupid, Mamdani picked a more relevant choice of music to delve into: hip-hop. Mamdani kept his ear to the streets and his eyes on the culture to keep a relatable and socially palatable image to align with the primary targets of his future base: young people, and how they seemingly couldn't get ahead in anything. After a couple of years in the underbelly of New York City politics, Mamdani launched his bid for city council in 2019. New York's 36th district was a perfect choice and exactly where Mamdani experienced the worst end of New York's affordability crisis, Queens and Astoria. He was immediately endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America and went full steam ahead into what has become one of the most remarkable political rises we've seen in years. Zohran Mamdani, unlike more notable leftist political figures arising in this era, picked less viral topics to campaign on, surprisingly. You see, there's an error in the way that most people, particularly on the right, view Mamdani. They see all the crazy posts about October 7th, or wanting to tax white people more than other races, or about seizing the private property of New York City grocery vendors, and believe he's an insane psychopath, intent on destroying the greatest city in the world. And to their credit, they're right. Although Mamdani was as progressive and woke as they come, all issues related to things like gender-neutral bathrooms, systemic racism, and the acceptability of the American flag were shoved to the side. Mamdani had opinions on all of them, certainly, and has made them clear when asked. But the brilliance of Zohran Mamdani, like all the other brilliant revolutionaries throughout history, focused on something underneath all of those issues: economics. The three-legged stool of Mamdani's city council campaign was as follows: housing reform, police and prison reform, and the public ownership of utilities. Even in regards to the law enforcement issue, Mamdani had a very black and white vision of the way he saw the world: the rich versus the poor, the haves versus the have-nots. He appealed to something not on the surface like race, gender, or sexual orientation. Instead, he appealed to what he knew hurt people the most, particularly in New York City: money, and why almost no one had enough of it to get by. This is why the analogies, caricatures, and hyperbole that gets thrown at Mamdani by his critics isn't landing. Their analogy, while somewhat right, is also mostly wrong. Mamdani is something that most champagne socialists in our country, from AOC to Bernie Sanders, are not: a true believer. Mamdani means every single thing that he says. He represents a true radical, a breed that can only be developed and incubated by years and years of resentment, a boiler room and pressure cooker that has been ignored for far too long. That boiler room and pressure cooker? The middle and working classes of New York City, those who do not work in banking, finance, entertainment, or fashion. Mamdani's role as an eviction aide never touched a single person involved in any of these sectors of New York's economy. Instead, he talked to all the people that served those people, the people that did their dry cleaning, drove their Ubers, and scrubbed their toilets. Mamdani, for all that is said about him, at least had the courtesy to get to know and understand his voters before getting into office. This is why people, including people who share a majority of his views, by the way, are terrified of him. He's a true populist, someone who knows deeply what the people he represents likes and, more importantly, what they hate. The most difficult part for Mamdani's inaugural campaign was getting the endorsement from the Democratic side of the aisle. His primary election with a firmly entrenched establishment Democrat took almost a month to call, but nonetheless, he got over the hump. And immediately, Mamdani set to work, being the only member of New York City's council to never miss a single session, a rare feat for any person, but much less a quote-unquote lazy socialist, like lazy conservatives describe him as. Mamdani knew that people, particularly the downtrodden, respect a fighter, and respectfully set out to prove himself as one. Mamdani, as of early this year, was a member of a remarkable 9 committees inside of New York City, where he began to worm his way into a new branch of advocacy: immigration. Mamdani, an African Muslim immigrant, somehow found his way on the committees for the Puerto Rican/Hispanic Task Force, the Asia-Pacific American Task Force, and the Task Force on New Americans, all funded by local taxation from the New Yorkers he was representing. This is where the parallel to the man who started this new strain of leftist thinking comes into play: Barack Obama. Obama, over time, was able to craft what people dubbed the quote-unquote Rainbow Coalition, a political bloc composed of everything that was not the mainstream, namely everything that was not white, Christian, or male. Obama used these various groups to hammer his way towards a campaign fueled by hatred and resentment, opening up all the wounds that America had tried to sew up for centuries in areas surrounding misogyny and racism, among others. But Mamdani had another point of leverage, one that Obama did not have. Obama, for all of his talk about economic relief, was in the pocket of nearly every single large K and Wall Street donor in the country. He bailed out the banks. He did the bidding of the Israel lobby in the Middle East. He did nothing to reach out to the people most affected by the 2008 financial crisis, one that he made worse by flooding the economy with cheap money and instituting no consequences to the biggest purveyors of this problem, along with his predecessor, George W. Bush. And this was a massive tactical error on the part of the American left, which led to the rise of Donald Trump. But little did they know that would also lead to the rise of someone far more dangerous, someone who would make Donald Trump's quote-unquote radicalism, which doesn't exist at all, look like nothing: Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani, to the chagrin of the American left, was a Frankenstein's monster created by the American left. The problem with the left, as more and more people are coming to realize by the day, is that they are a complete facade and mirage with what they claim to be and what they actually are. Just like Barack Obama, whatever they say they hate, they actually love. Whatever they say they're for, they're actually against. And this was made abundantly clear when Mamdani, not wanting to stall his momentum, threw his hat into one of the most prestigious rings in American politics, the New York City mayoral race. People like Ed Koch, Rudy Giuliani, and Michael Bloomberg all used the position to become some of the most notable figures of American life in the time they were in office. It is the most important local political office in America, bar none. It sets the tone for every other city across the country. The person who is the face of that franchise is, in many ways, the face of America in its current moment. When he declared his candidacy, Mamdani wasted no time in throwing the gauntlet down on just how radical he wanted to transform America's flagship city. He wanted to make the buses free. He wanted to impose rent controls and rent-stabilized housing. He wanted to seize grocery stores and make the government run them to quote-unquote drive down prices. He wanted universal child care. He wanted a $30 minimum wage. He wanted to build 200,000 new affordable housing units. He wanted to double the local tax on individuals and corporations making over $1 million a year. He vowed to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he visited ever again. And on its face, every single one of these proposed policies is absolutely insane. The government intervening in the natural economic flow of supply and demand is a disaster, whether it's with buses, housing, or anything else. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution blatantly states that the government cannot seize private property. New York City cannot fit 200,000 more affordable housing units. A $30 minimum wage would triple inflation in New York City overnight, exacerbating the affordability crisis that Mamdani claims he cares about much further. If taxes on corporations and the wealthy are doubled, both parties will flee, leaving New York City with no wealth in a situation further plunged into desperation that needs wealth more than any other place in the country. Regardless of what you think of Benjamin Netanyahu, arresting the head of state of another nation on foreign soil would send the world into chaos. As soon as Mamdani declared, the New York Times, the flagship news organization for our bipartisan chattering class, blasted him as unserious and quote-unquote thin. The Atlantic, the flagship news organization for neoconservative foreign policy and neoliberal economic policy, called his campaign quote-unquote magical realism. Why? They were petrified of him, and they should be. If Mamdani gets in, he will declare war on all of them from day one. But yet, as proven time and time again, our establishment Democrat and media apparatus proved to be remarkably out of touch. The biggest proof point of this was their nomination of Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, as its candidate for mayor. Cuomo, who had killed untold numbers of old people during the COVID pandemic and had gotten ousted for groping several female aides, was their man for the job, apparently. And this is remarkable when you think about it, because it shows just how transparent our political class actually is. As much as they want to shout from the rooftops about being quote-unquote allies to women and quote-unquote protecting the most vulnerable, their moralizing goes clean out the window whenever the rubber meets the road. Their fear of Mamdani's ascent to the position of the mayor of New York City was too great. They needed to pull out all the stops. And indeed they did. Cuomo got the backing from everyone you apparently quote-unquote needed to get to become the mayor of New York City. He was suddenly the man once again, shaking hands, kissing babies, every single person he needed to reclaim power. And all the data showed that it was working, because Mamdani was trailing for the vast majority of the campaign, leaving everyone to believe that they had just dodged yet another bullet. But they didn't. Instead, it caught them square between the eyes. And it wasn't even close. On election night, Mamdani was ahead by so many votes in the Democratic primary that Cuomo called him that very night to succeed. Or to concede, rather, casting him and his party into humiliation and scorn once again. This was the nail in the coffin for New York Democrats. No Republican had come close to winning prominent political office in New York in decades. Mamdani's fate and the fate of their city was all but sealed. Zohran Mamdani, the most radical politician currently operating in America, is soon going to be in control of America's most important city. Many people are asking questions such as the following. How could this happen? How could someone like Zohran Mamdani gain the reins of power in one of the most important political climates in the world? How could this have possibly happened? To anyone who Zohran Mamdani appeals to, this is an easy question to answer. A great indicator of exactly who this is, or what to look at, are as the people who voted for Zohran Mamdani. The data is shocking, because it's no one that people would, based on Mamdani's rhetoric and stances, would ever think. White millennials. Wait a second, people say. A Ugandan Marxist who wants to tax white people for being white got an overwhelming percentage of his votes from white people? How is that so? If it is this, if anything else, it shows the blindness of our ruling elite, those who have made no attempt at all to understand anything about the people they govern and what they care about. But if, for the sake of argument, they were curious about it, what would they find? What do white millennials have in common, exactly? The answer? They were all absolutely screwed by the 2008 financial crisis and its after effects. They are the most nihilistic generation on record, the ones who believe, perhaps rightly in some cases, by the way, that the world is so broken, the economy so rigged against them, that they'll never achieve anything out of merit. Many of them believe that they will never be able to get married, start a family, open a business, retire on time, or own a home, and all that data is starting to prove that out. Because the sadder truth, many of them will be right. It all goes back to Zohran Mamdani's first job when he was helping poor people not get evicted from their homes. Too many people are saying that he's stupid. He's not. He's one of the smartest politicians working today. He knows what moves the needle for people, and it's not preferred pronouns or the amount of melanin in your skin. It's about the money in your wallet and the balance of your 401k. It's about sending your kids to good colleges. It's about being able to lift yourself up out of poverty and enjoy a life for yourself, a better life for yourself. That's what Americans care about. More importantly, that's what our ruling class doesn't care about. It should be said, obviously, that Zohran Mamdani and his policies as future mayor of New York City will not fix these problems at all. In contrast, they will make them all worse, and much worse, as mentioned. The poor will get poorer, and the rich will flee and get richer. New York City, once the bright, shining city on the hill of the American Republic, will become a trash heap and a wasteland, all by the ironic doing of its own voters and their newly anointed savior. So why did people vote for him? Because they're sick of people like Andrew Cuomo. At least Zohran Mamdani puts up a convincing argument that he actually cares for his constituents. Andrew Cuomo clearly doesn't, so much so that he's willing to kill thousands of them to enhance his own political career and sell a book off the back end of it. Desperate people do desperate things. The desperate thing to do in this situation is to elevate a despot, someone who is so antithetical to what the people who have failed the younger generations are, that they have no choice but to use that person as a blunt instrument to get their point across to the people that have failed them. New York City, the Democratic Party, and our ruling class are about to learn this the hard way. You would think that Donald Trump would be a tough enough pill to swallow. Just wait until Zohran Mamdani ascends to power, and his message gets amplified further. There will be a national movement unlike anything we've ever seen. There will be revolt, uprisings, true challenges to the established order, particularly on the left, like we've never seen. All because of one variable: class. Everything we've experienced that's been tumultuous in this country, from race to transgenderism, is all disguised as a class problem. I'm not a Marxist. I don't agree with anything that Zohran Mamdani says or does, except for that point. When you avoid talking about class, when you willingly allow people to descend into poverty and squalor, don't be surprised when that same group of people elevates someone that puts your head in the center of a guillotine. Because at the end of the day, it won't be their or that person's fault for doing something about their problems. It will be yours for failing to do anything about theirs. Okay, so this Zohran Mamdani thing is really getting people in a tizzy, just to put it mildly, in this scenario. So I think it's important to understand how this happens because, like I mentioned in my monologue, the reason why Zohran Mamdani is ascending to be as powerful as he is, and he will be the mayor of New York City, by the way. There is nothing that is stopping that train from getting into that station now. He is going to ascend to be where he is going to be the most powerful local politician in the world, like I said, or in the country, at least, like I said. And so this is all, like I mentioned, a remnant and an outgrowth of the class war that has been brewing in America for a very, very long time. And this should be incredibly concerning to anyone who really cares about this stuff, because this is the issue undergirding every single thing that is happening in our country right now. So what I've said for a long time, what I discovered by reading several influential people, Tucker Carlson's book, A Ship of Fools, helped me with this a lot. There were Victor Davis Hanson's book, Bacha Ungar Sargon. Lots of smart people are talking about this now. Is that every problem, quote unquote, that we have in this country is some kind of problem that's actually a class problem. It's just disguised as something else. A race problem, more likely than not, is a class problem. A gender problem is more than likely a class problem. And again, I'm not a Marxist, I'm not a leftist, but there needs to be a discussion on the value-oriented conservative side about class, because as we've seen with Zohran Mamdani, and as we saw a little bit in terms of a lighter version, maybe in some ways, in Donald Trump, when you ignore class, you get people that are going to be elevated to do something about the class issue in the country. Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson were talking about this a couple weeks ago. We'll talk about that later on when it comes to young Americans, specifically millennials and Gen Z, and why they are so radical about this issue, because they probably should be at the end of the day. That's the kind of tough truth about this. But so, okay, this class war, how is it starting? And I think it's important to, before we go into how a class war happens, we need to understand that Mamdani is just the beginning of this dam breaking. There will be many more people than that come after Zohran Mamdani. There will be other copycats, and by the way, copycats that are not as smart and just as vicious as he is. When you get dumb people that are violent, that is a recipe for disaster in that way. At least Mamdani has some tact about the revolution he's currently spinning up. right now. And like I said earlier, we have neglected this problem, the class problem, for a far too long. We need to address it. And if we don't address it, it's going to open the door for people who are worse than Zohran Mamdani, much worse than Zohran Mamdani, to gain more and more of a foothold, political power. We're seeing this on the right with the issue of Nick Fuentes and the race issue and the anti-Semitism issue. And I think I might do an episode about that later on, because the same thing is happening on the right when it comes to the anti-woke backlash, just descending into stupidity and wild people like him and everything like that. But that's beside the point. So when you just shove a problem under the rug and you say that this is not actually happening, you don't need to worry about this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, whatever you say to that person, you will get clapped for it. And that's what we're seeing right now. Mamdani is only in power because there has been such a neglect on the class issue that people are elevating someone like Mamdani, who is so radical in the area of class, that he is going to completely shutter an entire American city. And that is going to be the price that we have to pay, and New Yorkers unfortunately have to pay, for the ignorance of class by our ruling class. And so what this has led to is a door opening and an opportunity for people like Zohran Mamdani to have a place in American politics to serve, as mentioned, an increasingly radical group of people, namely economically disadvantaged young people. And by the way, I think it was hilarious about the data about Mamdani and people who voted for him. He didn't get a lot of people that were Black, Mexican. He got some of those people, but it was primarily upper crust white people, or millennial white people, millennial young people, to put it broadly, or millennial white people that voted for Mamdani, which is so telling about this whole thing, because middle class, working class, Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, etc., they don't want this. And there's a telling reason why they don't want this, because Mamdani is going to destroy the city. And so the issue of young people also is also interesting, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, is that revolutions are led overwhelmingly by young people, particularly by young men. So we need to see what's the recipe for this. We need to see what's going on here. And so this radicalization of young people is dangerous, that Mamdani is leading, among other people. Trump is kind of leading it on the right as well, because we cannot be unradical about talking about economics. We need to be radical in talking about economics, because economics is the biggest lever for cultural stability, for overall individual stability, for family stability, everything around that. If you ignore the class issue, you will get revolution. That is how all revolutions start. It's not about race. It's not about gender. It's not about anything. That stuff is all background noise. If you ignore the class issue will come back and bite you so bad that your head will spin. And we need to start talking about it, and how Mamdani is able to kind of capture this ethos. And so this is really, class wars starting with three things primarily. The first thing is you ignore the most important thing to a group of people, especially when they cry out for help. So the most important issue to a group of people, largely when we're talking politically, is class. I don't make enough money. I have too much debt. My wage isn't growing. I can't afford to buy a home. I can't afford to send my kids to a good school. Our emergency fund is getting dwindled. 60% of Americans can't afford a $500 emergency right now out of pocket. And so we have heard these cries for help, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis, by millennials and by Gen Z now, as they're ascending and starting to make money and getting out on their own, at least some of them. And they have gotten no help from this. They've gotten no help from this. And so our older generations, our boomers, the Gen X people, and some of the older folks, if they're still alive and still around to engage in this type of a problem, they have ignored the problems of young people getting launched economically for a long time. A long time. They've said the whole thing's like, well, just do what I did. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They called them lazy. They called them snowflakes, etc. But the interesting thing about this is that they really did nothing to atone for or face the problems that really made their chances go down the tubes, particularly after two things: the 2008 financial crisis, which we've discussed, and COVID, which was the largest transfer of wealth that we have ever seen on a global economic scale. We'll talk about that later on as well. And we'll talk about the Scott Galloway TED Talk, but I want to touch on this briefly right now just to make sure we address it. So what is supposed to happen with wealth is it's supposed to transfer from old people to young people. And in COVID, that inverted. So wealth got transferred primarily from the earnings of young people to the assets of old people. That is how the COVID narrative flipped it for Gen Z. In 2008 more affected millennials. But regardless of what that is, we have seen no action. We have seen no alleviation. We've seen no one even talking about this or paying attention to this. So the 2008 financial crisis, COVID screwed the younger generation, which made them angry, understandably, upset, understandably. And instead of dealing with that issue of anger and resentment and all the things that were bubbling up underneath the surface, the older generations just kind of said, hey, figure it out. You know, you're a grown up, be a big boy, whatever, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, all that stupid nonsense. So the second step on how to start a class war, you find a person who is brave enough to call them out on their BS and you elevate them. So all revolutions are known for a leader. All revolutions need a leader. So whether that is Fidel Castro in Cuba, whether it's Pol Pot in Cambodia, whether it is Mao Zedong in China back in the Great Leap Forward days of the mid-20th century, you need someone that is brave enough to go out from that group of people that is being oppressed, quote unquote, by the economics, and we'll talk about economics in this case, but by whatever the issue is. And they are the only ones that are bold enough to say, hey, you're wrong, we're getting screwed by this, and it's your fault. And that's hard to find, especially now, because so many people are so terrified to talk about anything and to, rock the boat in any form or fashion that really all you need is that one person kind of saying something convincing, and that'll probably be enough, to be honest. Like, it'll probably be enough to push it out to the broader masses and really have a dent be made in the conversation, the cultural conversation. So all revolutions need the face of the franchise. There's a reason why Che Guevara t-shirts sell so much, even today. And it's because he was so memorable in terms of the revolution that he led. And there's a reason why there's still statues of Lenin and all these other things around the world. And so communists, Marxists especially, and fascists on the right, let's be fair, with Hitler or Mussolini or Hirohito or any of these other guys that kind of rose up in the 20th century, that's where all this kind of broke out for the first time, they need to be brave enough to speak out against the established narrative. So when it comes to class in America, they need someone like Zohran Mamdani to say, hey, we can't afford anything, and that is your problem, and I'm going to come and smash you. Donald Trump, when he came into politics about 10 years ago, he needs to come out and he needs to say, or someone, but it was just Trump in this scenario, needed to say, hey, you're ignoring all of these middle-class factory workers in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and everywhere else kind of around in that Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, and they're really angry at you because you took away their jobs and you outsourced their labor and you left them to be addicted to fentanyl and pills and not making enough money and living off the government and their housing being foreclosed on and their marriages falling apart and their kids falling into addiction. And that's really sinful, and you should hate yourself for that because we hate you for that. That's why Donald Trump got elected. That's exactly why he got elected. It's the same why he got reelected. Hey, this is so bad. People are so uninspired and torn down by every single thing that you have about yourself that we are going to crush you for it. We're going to crush you for it. And so the characteristics of this person, what does that look like? So they must be charismatic. They must have a swagger to them in terms of, hey, I'm going to talk about this way, and I'm going to have this. Luckily for Zohran Mamdani, he is a pretty handsome guy, and so he has that going for him too. Like, his face is everywhere. He's getting interviewed by Elizabeth Warren. He's doing all this kind of stuff. They also must say the quiet part out loud, and they must be brave enough to inspire people behind them, their supporters, their fellow revolutionaries that are following them into the fray, to throw them into power, and damn be the consequences. They're like, you know what? I don't like the way that Donald Trump acts on X, but I don't care. I don't like the fact that he's had third marriages and he's probably cheated on every single one of his wives multiple times. I don't care that he is kind of like a bully and he puts people down, etc. I'm mad, and I'm going to send Donald Trump into D.C. to F some people up, basically. You know, I don't like the fact that Mamdani is talking about blatantly violating the Fourth Amendment to seize public property and utilities and grocery stores. And I don't like that he's going to drive all the banks and all the financial institutions that power our economy out of here. And, I'm white, and I don't like that I'm going to get taxed more because Zohran Mamdani says I should get taxed more because I'm, inherently racist or something. But you know what? I'm really mad that I'm 60,000 in student loans and I can't declare bankruptcy on these things, and I can't afford to go out to dinner. I can't afford a home. I can't afford to get married. I can't afford to have children. So I'm going to send Zohran Mamdani in there to basically break these guys' teeth in. And that's exactly how this works. Jesse Kelly has this great saying about communism, where he says communism is a religion of the malcontent, and I love that because that's true. It is a religion and a political philosophy that is built on resentment, that is built on just the coercing and the bludgeoning of people in power, so that you can have a way to feel better about yourself, essentially. So, leads to number 3. The third reason how to start a class war, the third way to start a class war. You exact terrifying punishment on those who maligned you once you're in power. So once you're in power, you go about revenge. You exact revenge on the people that you declared your candidacy against. So Mamdani has already made this very clear. He's going to drive out the billionaires. He said, I'm going to tax you out the gills. You are going to hate living here. And basically all the other people, like white people, etc., I'm going to punish you. I'm going to tax you more because you're white. I will do that. I am going to raise your tax rate by 100% to drive you out of the city or to make you pay to fund all of my social projects or whatever it's going to be. I am going to freeze rent. I am going to take your property. I am going to do that. And because for the revolutionary, for the communist, for the Marxist, once you achieve power, once you become the mayor of New York City or the president of the Soviet Union or whatever the position is going to be, it is not enough for your followers to make ends meet. You have to crush everybody that opposed you in brutal fashion to make sure that they never hurt you again. This is why, by the way, that people are starting to get really mad at Donald Trump for not doing anything about the Epstein list. It's exactly the same thing. Hey, I hate these people. Why is no one in prison? Why is the list not released? Hey, the Department of Justice was weaponized this against the Biden administration or in the Biden administration. Why are none of those people in jail? Why are people not being put in cuffs and perp walked? Why is none of this stuff happening? And this is what makes these extreme movements on the right, but particularly on the left, so awful. The communists, the Marxists, etc. It always ends more than likely in bloodshed, and a lot of it. And you've seen this across, like communism has killed hundreds of millions of people over the years, and fascism has killed many, many people as well. But it is the fuel of all of these things. And at least with fascism, and this is not an excuse for fascism at all, but with fascism, it's built on a perverse sense of pride, and pride is the sin that leads to all the other sins. That's a biblical concept, at least to me it is. But the anger underneath the communist, underneath the Marxist, underneath the leftist is so palpable, and it's so forward that once you unleash it, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And that's exactly why this is happening with Zohran Mamdani. This is why it's happening with Donald Trump. This is why it's happening in other extremist movements. But in terms of class, and if you want to start a war on class, which is about the most destructive thing you can do to any single culture you can do, that's how I would do it. And that's how Zohran Mamdani's doing it. And to his credit, he's doing it very well, I think. And as mentioned, revolutions are primarily driven by young people, and they're primarily driven by young men. So young men are the engine. Like they're what Andrew Tate calls the warrior class. So you take a bunch of young men who are disaffected, who are sexless, who can't afford to, to buy a car, to buy a home, to take a girl on a date, whatever. And you say, hey, you've been oppressed. We're going to go take the Bastille. We're going to go, storm Red October, whatever it's going to be. And we're going to put people's heads in guillotines. We're going to chop people's heads off in the town square, and it's going to be great. And young men will bite at that in any context. And don't think that we're not that uncivilized anymore, that we would not do that today. We would certainly do that today. And many people are. This is why you see all the rise in crime, violence, carjackings, shootings, all that kind of stuff. It's primarily driven by young men. You hardly see any young women doing this inside of our culture. And so The reason why young people in particular, and we'll group young people broadly here, so young women as well, but the reason why people are turning to Zohran Mamdani is they are poorer than they ever have been before. And this deserves a distinction. So I heard the other day from a study that said this is the first generation since the generation of George Washington, aka the first generation of American citizens that formally declared their independence from Great Britain, that is worse off than their parents, Gen Z. They're worse off than their parents right now, economically. Like, that is a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe. Because, again, when class is the lever that gets destabilized, there is no going back from that at all. None. Zip, zero, all that kind of stuff. There's none. Because when economic standards decline, especially when we have it good, like we have it in America, people will get violent. And they will get violent very, very quickly. And so young people, the rising generations, are increasingly poorer than they ever have been before. And I want to be clear on this as well, because again, I'm not a leftist. I'm not a Mamdani fan. I'm not a Marxist. So lots of this has to do with decision-making, obviously. Lots of it has to do with decision-making. And so I want to basically say, I want to hit from both sides of the argument here, because this is the obvious solution to this problem. Like, don't take out a massive student loan for a degree that you're not going to use. Like, college is kind of stupid. Don't go into massive don't buy things you can't afford on credit. Don't do a bunch of BNPL, buy now, pay later solutions for like buying a couch or buying a pizza or something. Like, that's dumb. That's stupid. Don't overindulge in all that. And obviously, decision making is a huge factor in where you are economically. I would argue it's the number one factor in anything, but especially in economics, in your personal financial situation, you need to make good decisions, obviously. But a lot of this current situation with the economy, especially for young people, is macro. It's a macro problem. It's a macroeconomic issue that we have in America. Housing's too expensive, inflation, whatever else it's going to be. And young people have every reason to be enraged when it comes to the macroeconomics events that are out of control, that are pricing themselves out of every single marketplace that they have. Because you can't control the macroeconomy. There are only a select few people that can control that. They can't control the economy crash in 2008. They can't control the lockdowns of COVID and how inflation went way out of control, and the foreign policy decisions that were in that, and the energy decisions that were in that. And it led to the skyrocketing inflation. It led to housing prices, I believe, doubling over the span of 5 years in terms of, the COVID pandemic when it came to housing. It led to interest rates on mortgage loans going from about 2% to about 7%. They have no control over that. And so they have every reason to say, like, dude, what the hell? What the hell? You got to help me out here. Like, I can't participate in this economy because I do not have buying power. I do not have leverage. I do not have an opportunity to get leverage. And again, decision making, get a higher paying job, whatever. But if an economy does not work, broadly speaking, for a vast majority of people, that is a understandably and by definition unstable economic situation for a country. That's exactly what it is. And so what this is leading to is, again, them being priced out of the market in everything. And so let's name a couple examples. How about stagnating wage growth? So wages have been getting driven down for years, for a long time, ever since really the 1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA and outsourced a lot of good, well-paying jobs, union jobs, whatever. Reagan was about this as well. And this has not slowed down under Bush, under Obama, under Trump, under Biden, under whoever. So wages are going down because of, again, macroeconomic factors in terms of jobs getting outsourced. And now what the big thing that's going to continue to this trend as well for a lot of jobs that are for a lot of people, a lot of stable jobs for middle working class people in particular, is AI. AI is going to terminate so many jobs. And I think it's going to do a lot of white collar jobs. So with what globalization did for primarily blue collar work, such as factory workers or mechanics or manufacturers, whatever, AI is going to do the same thing with white collar labor, with white collar work. Like marketing, gone. Graphic design, gone. All this other kind of stuff. All these kind of, again, more, I hate the word low skill, but I'm going to use it here. These low skill type of jobs that really you don't need to have a specific and advanced set of skills, data entry, data analytics, anything like that. AI is just going to do that now. And so there is going to be a genocide of white-collar labor with AI, which is, again, going to drive most wages for people who do that kind of work way down because you can just outsource it to ChatGPT or Persephone or whatever it's going to be, whatever AI engine you use. And so when this happens, when you have such instability in the labor market for young talent and wages are not competing with whatever the world is outside, you will get a lot of what is happening now, which is the rise of the gig economy. And the gig economy, for maybe those who aren't familiar, is kind of like, I'm going to gain extra money by doing gigs, quote unquote, or second jobs. So I'm going to be a person on TaskRabbit who goes over and fixes somebody's sink, even though I'm not a mechanic, or maybe I am a mechanic, but I'm just going to do that on TaskRabbit. I'm going to drive Uber. I'm going to do DoorDash. I'm going to walk dogs on Rover. I'm going to do whatever. And so you'll get a lot of that. You'll get a lot of switching jobs. You'll have no career development anymore. Career development will plummet. It already has plummeted because people are switching jobs all the time. I'm going to go to this company and bait switch for this like $5,000 raise or this 5% bump or this compensation package or this benefits package or whatever it's going to be. And so I think what you're going to see in essence is the death of the career for many people. Like the career trajectory where you already stay at a company for like 40 years and you go to the company picnic, you do whatever, like that's gone. I think that the days of staying at a company for 40 years, and this is a real problem for the corporate world especially, that's gone. And so you will get a lot of churn, a lot of instability in the labor market, which will basically spin up a lot of people and will drive down wages even further. And with the stagnating wage growth, what you've gotten from that as well is an unaffordability of basically everything. And I think the biggest lie that the Trump administration told, this is a very sinful thing to do. I never forgave them for this when they were running in 2024. I like a lot of things that Trump says and does, but this was a horrible lie that they spun, is that they can get rid of inflation. Trump said, I can fix the inflation problem. J.D. Vance, I can fix the inflation problem. No, they're not. They can't. Inflation is sticky. Prices are sticky for the most part, especially for the most essential things. Gasoline, groceries, fuel, travel, childcare, wages, labor, all that kind of stuff. That is very, very hard to drive the cost down. The Biden administration did tremendous damage. The end of the Trump administration, the first term, did tremendous damage to the inflated cost of goods in this country and services in this country. And so they've made some of it better, but it's going to take a long time for people to fix it and a lot of sustained policy to fix it for a very long time. So let's just say, for example, whoever goes after Trump, whether it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or whoever, they get defeated by whoever runs on the Democrat side in 2028. That Democrat's going to undo everything that Trump did, and we're going to be right back in the cycle again. So we're playing like Russian roulette with our economic system here, and this is getting really, really dangerous, really dangerous. And so what does this mean? So when young Americans, who are the poorest people, just due to their age, because the greatest indicator of net worth for people is their age, the greatest indicator of net worth. If you are an older person, you are probably worth more in terms of net worth than younger people, just because you have had more time to accrue a bigger salary, more assets, your 401k grows, your house equity increases in value, all those things. And so when young Americans, because of this, they cannot afford to keep up with the basics, when the basic costs of goods go crazy high, again, gas, car repairs, used cars, groceries, all that rent, all that kind of stuff, they will never be able to feel comfortable and put an effort towards building wealth, which is critical because, again, wealth is a timing thing. You need to invest while you're young. You need to get into the housing market, ideally, when you're young. You need to start building your 401k up when you're young because the time will allow you to build wealth over time. It's just how money works. And the reason why young people can't do this, again, is because all of their capital, which is primarily coming from their salary or from their commissions or whatever they're making inside of their job, whatever they do for work, is going towards very basic survival. It is not going to assets. It is going to liabilities and base survival. It's going to their debt. It's going to student loans. It's going to credit cards. It's going to BNPL solutions. It's going to the overall economic state of the base of America, which is a rising cost of goods and services for all the things you just need to get by. Your utilities, your electric bill, all that kind of stuff. It is all going in that direction, which basically hamstrings young people especially from building wealth. And when you can't build wealth, you're never going to be able to adequately prepare for the future. And if an economic headwind comes your way, you're going to get taken out like nobody's business. And so the third thing, which is why young people and younger Americans are poorer than ever before, which is why they're not doing as well off as their parents, is that because of stagnating wages and lowering wages in many ways, and job switching and lack of career development, which takes out promotions, all these other things, because of the unaffordability of the basic cost of living, this is leading to an unavailability of assets for young people to invest into. So let's explain that. So because so many young Americans cannot afford the basic things that they need to live, this means that all the things needed to build wealth, which to build wealth, it's a very simple equation. You acquire assets. You buy stocks. No one really buys bonds that I know, but you buy bonds if you want to. You buy real estate. You invest in a business and you grow that equity of that business, etc. So wealth is about asset acquisition. And when you can barely keep up with your liabilities, which is your basic cost of living, essentially, those assets and those acquisition of assets get put on the back burner. And young people are not investing for the future because all they can think about is surviving the present moment, as said. So the assets are out there. Like the stock market is still there. You can still participate in the stock market if you want to. There's still plenty of houses in the real estate market. There always will be. But the question then becomes, who is buying those assets? Who is buying the stocks? Who is buying the bonds? Who is buying the mutual funds? Who's buying the real estate? Who's buying the businesses that the baby boomers are aging out of and they can't find any buyers? Old people. And this is that wealth transfer that we talked about with COVID. So because young Americans who should be buying these assets are not buying these assets, young people, or old people rather, older generations, are saying, hey, I'll buy a second house. I'll get a rental property. I'll throw 10,000 more into the stock market. Hey, I'll buy more, whatever. And so it is crowding out young people from getting advanced economically, which is, again, it's a catastrophe. And that is just, it's a remarkably dangerous thing, but it's happening. And we need to realize that it's happening, because if we don't, then we will get the revolution that Zohran Mamdani is talking about, which is not a good solution for anybody, particularly for young people who want to actually buy things and or participate in the economy. Because if they don't do that, it will never happen. And I think really the saddest thing and the biggest manifestation of this is the biggest lever that people use to build wealth. Young people in particular. If you want to get advanced economically, this is the most surefire way to do it. And it's not for everybody, but it's for most people, I think. And I think there's data to back this up too. So that lever is buying a home. Buying a home is the biggest thing you can do. Investing in some kind of a real estate, one that you ideally live in, is the biggest way that most people build wealth. That is most people's biggest asset when they go to retire at the end of their life. They sell their house, they cash out, they make a ton of money, and they fund their retirement with their 401k and hopefully other investment assets as well. But in terms of a single locked asset, it is your home. Scott Galloway puts it as forced savings, and I think that's a good definition for buying a house. And so that's how most Americans throughout their entire lives have been able to build their wealth. And so, but the problem is that most young Americans, I've heard numbers around 70%, and I believe this is true, believe that they will never be able to afford a home at all. Like never. Throughout the course of their life, they're going to be renting for the rest of forever, which is a catastrophe that this is happening. It's a catastrophe that this is happening. And, if you haven't seen it, Tucker Carlson's Turning Point USA speech about this was so good. It was so good because he's so right about this point specifically. Because if young people cannot achieve home ownership, America will go down the drain. If young Americans can't afford homes, if they're going to rent forever, if they cannot get inside of a house that they own, that they live in, that they take stewardship of, ownership of, that's a really, really bad sign for the future and the future of real estate. Because again, institutional investors, older people are scooping up these single family homes, and it's going to drive the pricing of all this stuff up. Because if young people can't go in, they're going to have to go for higher interest rates, worse loans, all that kind of stuff. It's just supply and demand at the end of the day. And I actually didn't know that most people's wealth is tied up in their home. I remember I asked one of my parents, maybe both my parents. It was both my mom and my dad, or one of the two, but it was definitely one of them. And I saw that statistic of most people's wealth being tied up in their house, and I didn't know that was a thing, to be honest. And so I kind of asked. I think it was my dad, it was my mom actually. I asked my mom. I was like, hey, is this true? Like, is most people's wealth actually tied up in their house? And they're like, yep. That's kind of our family situation. That's a bunch of families we know situation. That's why home ownership is so important. I didn't know this statistic earlier on. Like, it really kind of shocked me because I thought like most people had really fat investment accounts. Most people don't, because most people don't invest. I'm like, well, that makes sense, because if they're following that trend and, all that sort of thing. But a lot of people have homes, and so their home is the majority of their asset class. That's fine. And so the vast majority of people have most of their assets tied up into home equity if they're investors, which again allows them to retire and have a nice life that is comfortable. Because when you're renting, and I've rented for a very long time, I bought a home last year and I'm grateful for it, obviously, especially in this market. And I'm a young person, I guess, in some ways. And, when you rent, it's like you don't have privacy. You don't have a true sense of ownership of where you're at. And you can rest, but it's not your place. And the people can tell you what to do and everything like that. Like a home, it's like a car in a lot of ways. It's the true embodiment of Americanism, of American freedom, of all the things that really happen in that vein. And so if home ownership and all that comes with it is unattainable, retirement and the end of your life will be marred by far more hardship, which is catastrophic for our future citizens. Because again, young people eventually do get old at the end of the day. And if we are not able to accrue these type of assets, mostly a home, a house, that will be able to fund a lot of our retirement plans and just allow us to stop working at a reasonable age and all this kind of thing, then that's a catastrophe, because our old people, our seniors who do honest work, they play by the rules, they don't break the law, they don't cheat on their taxes, whatever, they deserve to kind of coast off into the sunset because they've paid their duty to the American experiment. They've paid their duty to the country. They have worked really hard. Most likely they have been good with their finances. They've raised successful children. They've participated in the community in some way, if nothing else by owning a home. And they deserve to have a nice end of their life. They deserve to retire and sit on a beach in Florida somewhere, or go off to Phoenix, Arizona, and go out to wherever, or rent an RV, or drive around the country. Like they deserve that. And I think that's a basic human thing. That's an American thing. That's a uniquely American thing, I think, to have that. We have a beautiful country, and I think people should experience that in their old age. And so the bottom line is this. If you don't own things, you don't have investment in the rest of the things. And so this goes back to the why home ownership is the biggest indicator of a stable society, because it is. And so the reason is, why is that? And so it's not your politics, it's not your religion, it's not your beliefs, although they'll certainly play a factor. So home ownership is the best indicator of a stable society, because people who are tied down into a home, they care about the community that the home is in. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line of the whole deal. They are far more, they care about where the home is. They care about what the home represents in the community. They're far more likely to, and you can look this up, by the way, homeowners are far more likely to vote. They're far more likely to be involved in their local community, whether that's their school board, their church, their mosque, their synagogue, whatever. And they care about what is going on, because the rest of their life is affected by what is going on around and inside of the home. Like, you start caring about HOAs. I didn't care about an HOA until I got into one. And you're like, what the heck's going on with this HOA? This is ridiculous. Well, it affects you now. It affects your lifestyle now, whether that's someone cutting your grass, whether that's someone's cleaning the streets, whatever it's going to be. And so they homeowners care about what is going on in the world, because the rest of their life is affected by where they are planted inside of a home. And if you are not able to own a home, and if no one owns, if everyone rents, that goes completely by the wayside. When an idiotic thing like the anti-ownership movement, you'll own nothing and be happy people. Those people are idiots. Those people are stupid, because, and they're satanic, I would argue, because they don't understand, or they do understand, they're just trying to undermine the reality of ownership, the reality of community, of family, of church, of local community. The base of all of that is home ownership for everybody. If people don't own houses, they don't care about their neighbors. They don't care about the lawn. They don't care about the streets. They don't care about the homeless people, urinating in front of your daughter's kindergarten. They don't care. And why should they? Because they have no stake in the argument. They have no skin in the game. So all of this to say, a home, there's a reason why I use homes and not how, and why it's home ownership, not house ownership. I think that's purposeful, and I think it's a really nice thing that we do that. A home is much more than a house. It's much more than a building, because that's all a home is if you really want to be cynical about it. But a home, for most people, is not an asset, even though it is one. And this is why I think I was so shocked about the home ownership stat. But a home, for most people, is a source of stability. That's what a home is. And that's why home ownership is so important in this country. People like to know what they are coming home to. They like to know that, I might have had a really bad day at the office. This guy, my boss might have yelled at me, whatever, but I can go to my place. I can sit on my couch. I can have dinner with my family at my dining room table. I can take, my ingredients out of my refrigerator and make myself a meal. I can sit out in my backyard or on my front porch, and I can decompress and talk with my husband or talk with my wife and have my kids run around in my front yard, whatever. It is a source of stability. It's a source of community. People like to know that they are protected, that they are safe, and that their family can live somewhere peacefully, that they can live somewhere peacefully, for that matter. And if they do not believe that this is a possibility, that home ownership is not a possibility for them, there is no way for them to live the rest of their lives both in and outside of the home. Because if you don't have a source of stability, if you are not coming from a source, this is why religious faith is so important, by the way. If you are not drawing from a foundation, a firm foundation, a source in anything, your house will be built on the sand. That's what the Bible says. It can't stand. Slightest wind's going to blow it away. And that's exactly what happens to your life for people who don't own homes. It's a terrible reality for everybody. And again, we got to start paying attention to this stuff, because home ownership is not just a building. It's not a building. It's a home. And if that is cut off from people, particularly young people who need it most to start acquiring wealth and building that stability, it's a catastrophe for everybody, but especially for young people. Okay, I want to end here with kind of where we began. So class is the most important conversation we can have as a society, because class affects everybody. And that we've been sold up a river on these lies about gender means so much and race means so much. And yes, should we pay attention to gender? Yes. Should we pay attention to race? Yes. You can't unsee it. It's just visible. It's immutable characteristics. But I've been hammering this drum for so long, ever since I got red-pilled to this conclusion. The most important conversation we can have as a society is class, because class affects everything. It is unique to every person, and every person is affected by it, whether you're rich, poor, middle class, etc. I've used this example before, and many people haven't liked it, but it's true. There is, when you want to play the immutable characteristic argument, we need to help this group of people, whatever. What I'll say is that a poor white person has much more in common with a poor black person than a rich white person. And vice versa. A poor black person has far more in common with a poor white person than a rich black person. And people are like, whoa, what do you mean by that? It's your skin color doesn't determine how you live and the values you have. That is up to you, but that's affected by class. If you live in a crime-ridden area where there's, not a lot of police presence, there's people getting mugged on the street, whatever, it doesn't matter what skin color you are. There's people getting mugged on the street. But if you live in a very nice neighborhood, white picket fence, whatever, it doesn't matter what color you are either. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. You live in a nice neighborhood where the grass gets mowed, where the streets are cleaned, all that kind of stuff. So class and the conversation around class either bonds a country together or rips it apart. Those are the two options that we have. So it either tears people apart or it brings them together. And we absolutely need to. We need to make sure that it does the former and not the latter. We need to have it bond us together and not have it tear us apart, because that's what people like Mamdani, like Trump in some ways, are kind of railing against. And it's destructive, and it's not a good way to build a society at all. It actually tears society apart in every single way you can imagine. So, bringing this full circle on the Mamdani conversation. So, the way we beat people like Zohran Mamdani is with people like J.D. Vance. That's exactly how we do it. Because J.D. Vance lived the exact opposite life of Zohran Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani came from privilege. J.D. Vance did not. He knows these people. This is why it was so smart for Donald Trump to pick him as his vice president. JD knows the class issue. And he talks about it in his book, in interviews, whatever. Guy slept in jeans. He had Coke or Pepsi in his baby bottle. Grew up around hillbillies who beat up and shot people if they made fun of their sister. He knows the working class. He knows how they operate. This is why I look up to JD Vance so much, is because JD Vance knew people like my family. JD identified with people like my family, who came from a very working middle-class upbringing on both sides of my family, my mom and my dad's. And still on my mom's side of the family. A lot of my family is very working poor, working class, middle class, still to this day. And so JD knows exactly what to do with the class question, which is why, by the way, so many institutional conservatives, the quote-unquote right, were against him as well. They did not want J.D. Vance to get inside of the vice presidency. They wanted Marco Rubio. They wanted Doug Burgum. They wanted somebody else. They did not want J.D. Vance. And that's very telling, because J.D. Vance is going to attack this class issue. And he has attacked this class issue. And he should have, because he has authority to speak on it. Because they know if JD is able to wield power in the future, and I think right now he's a massive front runner for the GOP nomination in 2028, if he chooses to run, that same group of people will be scared of him. And they should be. They should be. Unlike Mamdani, talking about JD here still, Mamdani paints a very nihilistic version of class, a very, very nihilistic version of class. And so he kind of says like, hey, and this is the fault with communism and Marxism at the end of the day from a philosophical perspective. Again, it's the religion of the malcontent, as Jesse Kelly says. So it's, it's not going to get better. You can't transcend your circumstances. You can't change anything about your life, so we got to eat the rich, essentially. But instead of Mamdani, we can look to people like JD who paint an inspirational version of class. Because the great thing about class, and why this is such a uniquely American issue and why it defines our country so much, is that unlike Europe, unlike Africa, unlike Asia, you can transcend class through good decision-making and the right help from the right leaders. It takes two to tango in this scenario. We need people making wiser decisions about their money, about their socioeconomic situation, and we need people who give enough of a shit about it to do something about it. And this has been, by the way, this is proven with the combination of JD and Trump, who have nothing in common. JD Vance and Donald Trump are not similar at all. Like at all. They have nothing in common in their life but the class issue and caring about the class issue. Now, Donald Trump did not come from the working class, but he was around the working class all the time. Construction crews, building crews, all union guys, all that kind of stuff. Donald Trump had that cachet and he had that pull with working class people because he knew how they operated. He didn't come from it like JD did, but he knew enough about it to be dangerous. And that proved to be a very effective combination politically for him. And so the bottom line, class must be at the forefront of every person's mind when it comes to issues in our world, issues in our culture. Because if we focus on the most important problems, our differences don't matter at all. They just don't. That's why I don't care what skin color you are. I don't care about any of that kind of stuff. And you shouldn't, if you're focused on the right stuff. Differences don't matter at all when it comes to class. No one cares about anything. And I think this is a broad conclusion, by the way. No one cares about anything you can't control. Like why? And the only people to do that are either trolls or irrational or true bigots. And there are them out there for sure. But you must control what you can control. You have to, which is what will allow everything else to be far more peaceful than it otherwise would be. Class cannot be transcended unless you are focused on it, unless you work on it, unless you improve yourself. And then it's up to leadership to help you do that. That's what good leaders do. They lead their people. They care about their people. They love their people. And that combination is lethal when it comes to class. Thank you all for watching. Own the day. Open your mind. See you next week.